Hi there, I'm Musar, and I wanted to actually apologize for the clickbaity title. If you stick with me, I really think you'll see where I'm coming from, though. There are definitely some advantages to using a dry wet knob on a reverb, and we'll be going over a couple of those at the end of this video, but in my experience, it's generally not well suited to most of the things that you want to use reverb for. So let's start out by looking at some of the problems that can arise from using a dry wet knob on a reverb. If I wanted to process just the reverb, that's pretty much impossible using the dry wet mix. If I want to high pass or low pass the sound without affecting the reverb, or if I want to high pass or low pass the reverb without affecting the sound, I can't do that. Also, if I want to have two reverbs that are processing the sound in different ways but not processing each other, I also can't do that with this method. While some reverbs have solved some of these issues with additional features, all of these problems are instantly solved just by using a send. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, here's a quick rundown. Instead of blending the unprocessed and processed signal together on the track, we instead have two separate signal paths, one with only the dry signal and one with only the wet signal. Then, by scaling the volume of one or the other, we control that dry-wet balance. Here I have two separate versions of the same reverb. One is being sent through a single chain with a dry-wet mix as the control. The other has the dry signal and the wet signal split onto those two different tracks, and I'm controlling the volume of the signals. If the volumes are equal, we hear what is essentially the same as a 50% dry-wet mix. If the wet signal is reduced by between 6 and 10 decibels, that's about the same as a 75-25% dry to wet mix. Conversely, reducing the dry signal by 6 to 10 decibels would be the equivalent of a 25-75 dry wet mix. So the traditional method of setting up a send would involve setting up what's called a return track, a separate audio lane in your mixer that you route some portion of a track into in order to control the balance between that element. This is really useful if you want to have something that is feeding just a little bit of a bunch of sound so that they're all sharing the same effect, or to send something away and process that separately from the rest of your song, such as having a distortion unit or a saturator that you're sending little bits of your song to just to help add a little bit of loudness or a little bit of color. The way that I like to set it up is usually on the track itself. I use Ableton's audio effect racks, but there's a couple of other ways you can set this up, such as using Patcher in FL Studio, or using third-party tools such as Kiloheart Snap Heap. If you're in Ableton, it's really easy to set this up. Just drag whatever reverb you want onto the audio effect chain list, then right-click and select Create Chain. Then, with the reverb at 100% dry wet, you're pretty much all set. There's two ways of controlling the send amount or the depth of the effect. One way would be to control the chain volume directly, like I showed you in the example. Another way would be to use something like Ableton's utility plugin on each track and then control the amount of the signal that gets sent into that chain. In Snap Heap, it's just as simple. You can use this button right here to split the signal into two parallel processing lanes rather than two serial lanes, then place the reverb on one of the channels, set the mix to 100%, and then either control the gain down here at the bottom of the lane or by using the gain snap-in. This solves both problems that we have in a really elegant way. If, for example, I wanted to distort the signal going into the reverb, but leave the dry signal unaffected, I can just drop this distortion onto the wet channel here. If I want to low pass only the dry signal and leave the wet signal unaffected, I can just put this on the dry chain. If I want to layer multiple reverbs onto the same track, I can just add more chains into this list. Dry wet 100%. Now I have two separate reverbs. One that could be maybe really short and really small, and that's adding a lot of brightness, a lot of energy to the sound. And then I have another reverb that I can control the pre-delay of, I can control the length of, I can make it a little bit longer, a little bit bigger, and that will set the distance of the sound to us in the mix. There are a few additional benefits I find to using sends in this way. I tend to use much less reverb when it's on a send than when it's on a dry wet mix, and that leads to cleaner and less washed out mixdowns. Decoupling the processed from the unprocessed signal also opens up a lot more creative possibilities. For example, equalizing or compressing the signal before it goes into the reverb will drastically change the sound and the character of that reverb. Overall, I feel like I have more points of control on the sound at every step of the process. How much of the signal is going into the reverb? How much of the reverb is going out to the mixer? What's happening to the sound when it goes into the reverb? What happens to the sound when it goes out of the reverb? The process can be as simple or as complex as the situation calls for. As I said at the start of the video, there are some advantages to using the dry wet knob on your reverb. For example, if I'm trying to create a transition between two sections, one quick and effective trick is to take the first hit from a sound in the section that you're entering and record a reverb tail to reverse into that section. So here's a quick little demo that I mocked up. I'm going to take this sound right here, and I'm going to take just that very first hit. I'm going to pull this back real quick. Going to fade that out just a little bit. Then I'm going to grab a reverb, put its dry wet to 100%. Give that decay a lot more time. I might even get rid of this for now. Perfect. Now, let me kill that. If I just go turn on M Recorder, grab this, cool. I can go ahead and turn this off, grab that from the current project. Right here, I put a folder called renders so that I can really easily just drag this in. You can see the reverb tail right there. Now I can just grab this chunk right here in the middle, reverse it, and now yeah. Similarly, if you want to add breath and motion to a section, you can actually automate the dry wet mix on a reverb to create reverb throws. I'm going to do that on this guy right here. I'm just going to put a reverb on this track. I'm going to put the decay way up, and then I'm just going to automate the dry wet knob. I'm going to grab it, and I'm just going to do quick little sweeps like this. I'm going to duplicate that, duplicate that, duplicate that, get that going. And then I can just start adjusting how fast or how much the reverb shows up. Make these a little bit smaller. Maybe make this one a little bit larger. Have that kind of ramp up. Let's hear that in context. In conclusion, I want to confess that I still use the dry wet knob on my reverb from time to time. I'm not trying to evangelize to you to just quit using it altogether. What I want you to walk away from this video with is, like I mentioned, the point of control that you have, the ability to increase that, to get as simple or as complex with the control over the sound as you want. This can be extended to the concept of parallel processing in general. Having multiple layers of processing on a single signal creates a more interesting sound. It creates a more dynamic sound. It creates a more varied sound. It gives you more control over what's happening. If you agree with me or disagree with me, I'd really like to know in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Do all the YouTube stuff. Hit the little bell thing. If you're interested, check out my Patreon. I've been uploading a lot of video tutorials there that I can't necessarily post on YouTube, either because they risk copyright infringement or because they are too unedited or they're too short for the kinds of stuff that I generally want to put on this YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.